August 2nd, 1990. In the desolate wastelands of southern Iraq, a seemingly endless shadow forms on the horizon. Iraqi troops, 100,000 strong, begin swarming into neighboring Kuwait. Supported by thousands of tanks and armored vehicles, the Iraqis roll down the highway toward sleeping Kuwait City, the nation's capital. As dawn turns to day, Kuwaiti citizens awaken to the sound of gunfire, a brave but hopeless resistance that is extinguished within hours. Before the smoke clears, the terrified inhabitants discover their land has been overrun, their leaders either missing or dead. Heavily armed soldiers inform the people of Kuwait that they are now under the provisional rule of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. From his command bunker near Baghdad, Saddam listens to reports of the invasion with great satisfaction. Kuwait, often considered the jewel among Arab nations, is a rich prize. The tiny emirate is strategically crucial because of its access to the Persian Gulf and the vital waterways of the Middle East. But most importantly, Kuwait produces approximately 10% of the world's oil. For Saddam Hussein, the occupation of Kuwait is a daring grab for respectability and power on the world stage. He now has a trump card to dictate his own personal, political, and economic agenda on an international level. Should that fail, his forces in Kuwait are poised only a stone's throw away from the abundant oil fields in eastern Saudi Arabia. At a single stroke, Saddam has achieved a goal he has long sought. He has transformed himself from the leader of a regional power into a force to be reckoned with on a global scale. Meanwhile, in another army headquarters 7,000 miles away, an American general watches these developments closely. H. Norman Schwarzkopf is in charge of monitoring threats to oil reserves in the Arabian Peninsula and is well acquainted with the actions of Saddam Hussein. Although Schwarzkopf's central command in Tampa, Florida, has been criticized in some military circles as being little more than a bureaucratic outpost, it fields data crucial to maintaining order in the unstable Persian Gulf. With advanced optical and infrared satellite imaging, Schwarzkopf is able to detect not only the massive deployment of the Iraqi army in Kuwait, but its disposition as well. If these forces continue their march into Saudi Arabia, Schwarzkopf knows that Saddam could control an estimated 40% of the world's oil reserves. Ardent and meticulous, General Schwarzkopf begins examining a range of U.S. military options to present to his superiors, already knowing that peace in the region cannot be assured until Saddam's reign of terror is ended. Over the course of the next several months, Saddam Hussein and General Norman Schwarzkopf will emerge as the two central figures in a conflict with worldwide consequences. Each will be in command of his nation's military forces in the field. And with their imposing personas, each will have the confidence, the will, and the desire to lead those forces into battle. Yet the war in the Persian Gulf will turn out to be far more than a showdown between two larger-than-life individuals. It will be a clash of leadership styles and philosophies of command that are as different as night and day. Saddam, a ruthless opportunist, is the leader of a highly centralized military machine, designed first and foremost to protect and expand his totalitarian rule. Schwarzkopf, on the other hand, will be part of a leadership team that must respond to pressures as diverse as congressional approval and public opinion. The challenges facing this team will be enormous, from moving 500,000 troops halfway around the globe in a few months' time to holding together a fragile international coalition. But one of the most imposing obstacles facing General Schwarzkopf and his command group will be the dangerously volatile personality of the Iraqi dictator himself. The actions of Saddam Hussein on August 2, 1990 had been swift, brutal, and, as befit his nature, unpredictable. The name Saddam means literally, one who confronts, and for much of his life he has lived up to his name. Born in 1937 in the small town of Tikrit, Saddam started his climb to power as a revolutionary in the radical Arab Ba'ath Party, a secular faction originally dedicated to advancing socialist, non-religious policies. At 22, he took part in an assassination attempt on then Iraqi President Abdul Karim Qasim. In the 1960s, as the Baathists came to power, Saddam became a major policymaker, often using strong-arm tactics to bring his ideas to fruition. In 1979, he forcibly seized the reins of leadership in Iraq and promptly executed nearly 24 of his closest rivals, quickly transforming the Ba'ath Party from an engine of social change into his own personal bastion of authority. Saddam immediately began wielding his power in the region, ordering his troops to occupy the Shatt al-Arab waterway that divided his country and Iran. This territorial dispute rapidly turned into a full-fledged war. With the Shah deposed and American support for Iran withdrawn, Saddam mistakenly viewed the fundamentalist government of the Ayatollah Khomeini as an easy mark. The bloody conflict lasted from 1980 to 1988, with an estimated 1 million Iraqi soldiers killed. During this time, Saddam continually claimed that he was fighting to eliminate the spread of Islamic fundamentalism. Truly ironic, given that less than a decade later, he would use religion in an attempt to incite his Arab brothers against the United States in a holy war. When the Iran-Iraq war finally ended, Saddam demanded that Kuwait erase billions of dollars in loans it granted Iraq during the conflict. But Kuwait refused, and Iraq, with all its military might, remained strapped by a huge war debt. Unfortunately for Kuwait, Saddam thought he saw an easy way to wipe out that debt and to enhance his personal power at the same time. In the summer of 1990, he put his plan into action. Within hours of Saddam's aggression in Kuwait, an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council condemns the Iraqi invasion. But world leaders know that without the tangible threat of force, these condemnations are just so many empty words. The international community, including the ousted Emir of Kuwait and King Fahd of Saudi Arabia, looked to the United States to provide the political and military leadership to give the UN resolutions credibility. With America's own vital interests in the region at stake, President Bush quickly heeds the call. He imposes economic sanctions against Iraq and commands a U.S. aircraft carrier to join 8 other U.S. warships already in the Persian Gulf. He also holds a series of meetings with the nation's top cabinet members and military strategists. Men like Secretary of State James Baker, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Colin Powell, and General Norman Schwarzkopf. During his meeting with the President, Schwarzkopf presents a number of possible U.S. military plans, from immediate air and sea strikes to a defensive barricade in Saudi Arabia. Saddam, meanwhile, watches curiously, testing the mettle of the United States. Believing that the stigma of Vietnam still lingers in the minds of the American public, he's betting that the U.S. will succumb to indecision and that its politicians will be reluctant to commit troops to another ground war thousands of miles away. The lessons of Vietnam are also etched deeply in General Norman Schwarzkopf's memory. Although he had been raised by a soldier and was intimately associated with the Army for nearly all his life, Schwarzkopf's entire attitude as a military man had been reshaped after 2 grueling tours of duty in the gut-wrenching crucible of Vietnam. Norman Schwarzkopf Jr. was born on August 22, 1934 in Trenton, New Jersey, the son of Colonel and Mrs. Norman Schwarzkopf. When World War II erupted overseas, Colonel Schwarzkopf was dispatched to Iran to establish a U.S. security base to aid the Russians in their fight against Nazi Germany. On his 12th birthday in 1946, Norman Jr. joined his father, now a brigadier general in post-war Iran. Their travels soon took them to Switzerland and Germany, where Norman Jr. became fluent in French and German. He was also large for his age and excelled in sports. These qualities made him a natural to follow in his father's footsteps to West Point, and in 1956 he graduated in the top 10% of his class. In the following years, Schwarzkopf continued to expand his military horizons in areas as diverse as parachuting and missile mechanics. His IQ was reported to be 170, well above the level of genius, and his ambitions were equally high. He returned to West Point in 1964 as an instructor in engineering. Then, just 1 year later, Captain H. Norman Schwarzkopf Jr. left his teaching post for an assignment to Vietnam. Within months, he was seeing his first action commanding South Vietnamese airborne troops through enemy fire. By the war's end, he had risen to the rank of Brigadier General and had been awarded 3 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts, including 1 Silver Star for braving an enemy minefield to rescue a fallen soldier and his trapped battalion. It was this evident compassion for his troops that earned him the affectionate nickname, the Bear, from those who served under him. But Schwarzkopf had also experienced more than his share of bitter moments in Vietnam. He witnessed what he considered to be unnecessary political meddling in the conduct of the war, meddling that restricted the military from doing its job and that was paid for with American blood. Upon his return to the United States, with the painful nightmares of Vietnam still raging in his mind, Schwarzkopf had time to reflect on his frustrations. In an interview with the author of the book Friendly Fire, he said, "When they get ready to send me again, I'm going to have to stop and ask myself, is it worth it?" Although Schwarzkopf would later answer the call to duty as deputy commander of the Grenada invasion in 1983, these doubts would still linger. He was critical of many oversights in strategic planning that could have placed that operation and, more importantly, the lives of the men and women under his command in peril. Although his blunt and often volatile demeanor bred resentment among some fellow commanders and subordinates, earning him the somewhat unflattering nickname of Stormin' Norman, Schwarzkopf was never accused of not telling it like it was. This quality of extreme frankness was central to Schwarzkopf's entire style of leadership, as President Bush would soon find out. At Camp David, 2 days after Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, General Schwarzkopf is intent on giving President Bush his most honest assessment of what will be required to halt the advance of the Iraqi army. In elaborate and forthright detail, he begins to spell out a plan, knowing full well the president may blanch. But Schwarzkopf does not waver. The U.S. military in Vietnam had been accused of regularly sugarcoating the truth in an effort to please the president. The general is determined not to make this mistake. He candidly informs the president that defending Saudi Arabia against the world's 4th largest standing army will not be an easy task. A majority of Saddam's 100,000 troops in or near Kuwait are members of the elite Republican Guard, highly skilled, battle-tested warriors who helped stave off defeat at the hands of Iran. In addition, Saddam's military possesses modern Soviet MiG fighters, an abundance of Soviet-made tanks, and the capability to launch missiles armed with chemical weapons. Schwarzkopf's plan calls for as many as 40,000 U.S. troops, along with heavy weaponry from all branches of the armed forces, to be dispatched to the troubled region. It is a plan that will take at least 3 months to set in place. And more importantly, it will require the use of Saudi Arabia's airfields and harbors. "24 hours later, General Schwarzkopf and Defense Secretary Cheney are en route to Saudi Arabia to brief King Fahd. The Washington brass have been extremely impressed with Schwarzkopf's contingency plan for the defense of Saudi Arabia. Yet the general, with his keen insight into the personality of the Middle East, is only cautiously optimistic. He knows that an Arab nation hosting Western forces on its soil is virtually unheard of. Upon his arrival in Jeddah, Schwarzkopf skillfully presents detailed information to King Fahd outlining the Iraqi buildup and the planned American deployment. In a matter of minutes, the king is convinced. Although he runs the risk of alienating the entire Arab community, the Saudi ruler boldly agrees to invite American forces to his land to protect Saudi Arabia's interests. Back in Washington, President Bush and his staff received this news with both enthusiasm and apprehension. Without delay, they begin smoothing out many last-minute political concerns regarding U.S. troop deployment to Saudi Arabia. At the same time, logistical and tactical aspects of the operation are already being addressed by the American Command Group, a group now headed by General Schwarzkopf. After years of readying for a crisis like this at Central Command, Schwarzkopf will finally get the chance to set one of his plans in motion. It is a responsibility that even has the veteran commander himself in awe. He will be overseeing air and sea lifts of men and equipment that will ultimately exceed those of the pivotal D-Day invasion at Normandy in World War II. The operation will be called Desert Shield. In Baghdad, Saddam Hussein learns of the decision to send U.S. forces to the region while celebrating his official annexation of Kuwait. Although he has misjudged the resolve of the United States, Saddam's spirits are not dampened. He at last believes he has a way to rally the Arab world behind him. Hoping to play on common Arab resentment towards the United States and Israel, he vows to pluck out the eyes of those who attack the Arab nation. However, most Arab leaders see through Saddam's cynical ploy. Several days later, the Arab League votes to send troops to support the U.S.-led forces in Saudi Arabia. Saddam's attempt at manipulation has failed. His rallying cry for Arab unity has gone unanswered, at least for now. Meanwhile, in addition to the tens of thousands of U.S. troops initially slated for mobilization in Desert Shield, Schwarzkopf must oversee the deployment of advanced aircraft, munitions, and myriad other supplies. Juggling firepower from all U.S. military branches and setting up a command infrastructure in a barren patch of desert on the other side of the world will require an unprecedented degree of communication, timing, and cooperation. But Schwarzkopf knows that the bulwark of this defense will have to be erected quickly. If it isn't, the comparatively small number of Americans taking up positions in Saudi Arabia will be virtually defenseless. Little more than speed bumps should Saddam order his army to roll forward. As the nations of the world begin enlisting in the military coalition against Saddam, it soon becomes obvious the lengths to which the Iraqi dictator will go to strengthen his position. On August 15th, he announces that he is immediately withdrawing all Iraqi forces from Iran. In addition, he declares that he is releasing all Iranian POWs and will renounce his claim to the prized Shatt al-Arab waterway. It is a shocking concession considering that for years Iran has been his sworn enemy. And it serves to underline the fact that Saddam will bargain with anyone as long as it advances his goal of holding on to Kuwait. Several days later, Saddam goes an ominous step further when he begins detaining U.S., British, and other foreign nationals and positioning them in key sites, obviously to be used as human shields. A week later, in a display reminiscent of Ho Chi Minh's photo sessions with small children in Hanoi, Saddam appears on television with his arm protectively wrapped around a young English boy. But instead of making himself appear the benevolent leader, the move backfires. The addition of hostage-taking to Saddam's list of outrages only serves to further inflame the world community. In sharp contrast to Saddam's clumsy attempts at manipulating the Western press, Schwarzkopf soon shows that he has an uncanny knack for public relations. Realizing from his experiences in Vietnam how important good relations with the media are to keeping public opinion firmly behind any military operation, he makes himself readily available to reporters from around the world. He gives frequent speeches and press conferences that skillfully keep the American people and his troops focused on the job at hand. With his imposing size and robust appeal, Schwarzkopf quickly becomes a media darling. These appearances not only aid in creating the image of a supremely confident leader, but also help instill in his forces a compelling sense of what must be done to win the coming battle. Meanwhile, the American military buildup is astonishingly rapid and efficient. Transports arrive at the Dhahran Air Base every few minutes, unloading troops and cargo, then setting off again for another run. In early September, Schwarzkopf breathes a sigh of relief when the 24th Mechanized Infantry Division arrives in Saudi Arabia. Now the coalition ground forces finally have the punch they need to effectively defend themselves. They are no longer speed bumps for Saddam's Republican Guard. In the meantime, President Bush authorizes the call-up of military reservists to bolster the combat forces in the Gulf, the first such order since Vietnam. The stakes in the crisis are getting higher, and so are Schwarzkopf's responsibilities. One of the most important of these responsibilities is to find out as much as he can about his nemesis, Saddam Hussein. Information is sketchy, but one top-secret psychological profile of the Iraqi dictator reveals a telling bit of information. In the early 1960s, Saddam, a member of the then renegade Ba'ath Party, was surrounded in his hideout by members of the Iraqi security police. With only a pistol and a single magazine of ammunition in his possession, Saddam fired every round at his enemies before finally surrendering. It is a chilling insight. Now more than ever, Schwarzkopf knows that he is up against an extremely dangerous opponent, one who doesn't care about the odds against him, and who isn't likely to buckle under to any pressure short of force. Intelligence reports from Kuwait reinforce this assessment. Saddam has bolstered his positions in the hostage nation to a massive degree. By the end of September, Iraq has an estimated 430,000 troops in or around the Kuwaiti perimeter, more than 4 times the number that invaded the nation on August 2nd. President Bush, meanwhile, feels mounting political and economic pressures at home over the continuation of a costly, open-ended defensive presence in the Persian Gulf. A restless public begins to demand a clear and finite goal for American policy. As a result, President Bush asks General Schwarzkopf to modify his defensive plan into an offensive one that is designed to drive the Iraqis out of Kuwait. Schwarzkopf is uneasy, citing the vast strategic differences between defense and offense. He would need an entirely different force structure and many, many more troops. But after a visit by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Colin Powell to Schwarzkopf's headquarters in Riyadh, Schwarzkopf is assured that should the time come, he will be given all that he needs to carry out his plan. Powell, a Vietnam veteran like Schwarzkopf, also remembers the organizational and political chaos that constricted the U.S. military's efforts in Southeast Asia. He's resolved not only to give Schwarzkopf the military resources that he needs, but also the strategic latitude to call his own shots. In the following weeks, President Bush increases the American involvement in Desert Shield, raising the total of U.S. service personnel in the Gulf to over 400,000. Secure in the knowledge that he will be able to finish anything that he starts, Schwarzkopf can now concentrate on piecing together an offensive. The most obvious U.S. advantage lies in its air power, particularly its state-of-the-art Air Force and Navy fighters. Air Force Lieutenant General Charles Horner, a veteran of 118 combat missions in Vietnam, will ultimately be responsible for overseeing the air assault missions imperative for knocking out Saddam's army. But Schwarzkopf knows that other elements of his armed forces must also be called upon. An avid student of military history, he often points to the success in World War II of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, Germany's legendary Desert Fox. Combining speed, deception, and intimidation, Rommel chalked up victory after victory in the scorching terrain of North Africa, consistently defeating larger and better equipped enemy forces. Schwarzkopf's own battle credo is based on mobility and lethality, 2 terms that are certainly applicable to Rommel's famed panzer divisions. Schwarzkopf reinforces this doctrine zealously with his top army commander, General John Yosuk. He stresses that the general's tanks and helicopter gunships must be positioned to move fast and strike hard. The Marines, meanwhile, under Lieutenant General Walter E. Boomer, rehearse amphibious assault drills intensively. They know that they may have to attack the beaches of Kuwait and the teeth of the Iraqi defenses at a moment's notice. Through all this, the Navy, commanded by Vice Admiral Stan Arthur, must maintain its airtight blockade of Iraqi ports and its dominance in the waters of the Persian Gulf. Now all Schwarzkopf needs is a plan to put these tools to work. He immediately throws himself into the task, often working 18-hour days. With what he calls his Jedi Knights, a brain trust of specially trained strategists named after the master warriors in the Star Wars films, he conducts intensive analysis of the Iraqi army and its defenses. Schwarzkopf receives updates 3 times a day on the layout of Iraqi units in the war zone. One element this data suggests is that Saddam's western flank in Iraq is dangerously overextended. With his Jedi Knights, Schwarzkopf devises a plan that eventually will be known as the Hail Mary play. Ironically, it's inspired by a similar strategy British General Bernard Montgomery employed to defeat Rommel at the Battle of El Alamein in World War II. In effect, it calls for feinting one way and hooking the other. Schwarzkopf's fake to the east will be with his Marines off the coast of Kuwait and his naval power in the Persian Gulf. His hook will be to the west and will entail a broad sweep into Iraq by his heavy armored divisions. It is a bold and risky plan calling for a massive shift of forces right under the noses of a numerically superior enemy. But Schwarzkopf is confident that if properly executed, Hail Mary will shatter Saddam's army and drive the Iraqis out of Kuwait. In the weeks that follow, neither side shows any sign of backing down. Economic sanctions fail to weaken Saddam's grip on Kuwait. And on January 12th, the U.S. Congress narrowly votes to support military action in the Gulf. As several 11th-hour attempts at diplomatic compromises fail, the threat of war looms ever larger.
Regrettably, ladies and gentlemen, in over 6 hours, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever on complying with the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
In the parched deserts of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, soldiers from all over the world, including over 400,000 Americans, prepare for battle. January 17, 1991, 3 a.m. U.S. F-117A stealth fighters soar undetected through the Iraqi night. Then, with pinpoint accuracy and split-second timing, they release their laser-guided bombs over the Iraqi capital of Baghdad. Thundering blasts shake the ground as Desert Shield gives way to Desert Storm. The war is on. As warning sirens blare, the dark sky over the city becomes ablaze with anti-aircraft fire, sparkling more vibrantly than any display of fireworks ever seen. More explosions rip the city. Tomahawk cruise missiles from the USS San Jacinto stationed in the Red Sea, and the USS Bunker Hill in the Persian Gulf. Within minutes, key radio communication centers in and around Baghdad are obliterated. Iraq's capital is in flames. At the same time, the stealth fighters are knifing over Baghdad. U.S. Army Apache attack helicopters blow out radar emplacements on the Saudi-Iraq border. This assault opens air lanes for U.S. F-15E and F-111 fighter bombers to destroy enemy defense centers in western Iraq. Without operational guidance and communication systems, Iraq's highly centralized air force is virtually grounded. The Iraqi planes that do manage to take off are quickly downed by the more skilled, better equipped U.S. pilots. This action highlights a key element of Schwarzkopf's strategy, one that will be repeated throughout the conflict. Knowing that Saddam's military is highly dependent on Soviet equipment and tactics, which rely on strong central control, Schwarzkopf plans to concentrate on taking out the nerve centers of Saddam's defense establishment. With communications cut off from their headquarters, Schwarzkopf is betting that Saddam's field commanders will lack the initiative and expertise to mount an effective defense. These soldiers, regardless of rank, have not been groomed to make decisions on their own. They have been picked mainly because of their personal loyalty to Saddam. Trained to blindly enact a predetermined strategy, they are habitually fearful of making any move that might be construed as insubordinate. For in Saddam's eyes, even the slightest hint of an action that fails to originate with him is tantamount to treason. Schwarzkopf intends to exploit this Achilles heel to the fullest, taking Saddam's iron control of his military and turning it against the Iraqi dictator. As the relentless coalition air raids continue, Saddam emerges from his command bunker in an attempt to rally his people. He proclaims that the mother of all battles has begun. But brash pronouncements can't stop the destruction that's raining down all around him. Soon after, his air defense network is crippled. His air force is effectively destroyed, demonstrating that Schwarzkopf's strategic approach is correct. But Saddam still has a few bullets left in his pistol, and on January 18th, he fires them. Just one day after the coalition air offensive begins, Saddam unleashes 8 Scud missiles at Israel. He hopes to provoke the Israelis into retaliating, which might then cause Arab support for the coalition to dissolve. But skillful diplomacy by Baker and Bush, along with the swift dispatch of super-sophisticated Patriot anti-missile missiles to Israel, mollifies the Israeli government. Thankfully, they will stay out of the war. With this effort blunted, Saddam tries another ploy to undermine the resolve of Schwarzkopf's forces. He parades several downed U.S. pilots in front of TV cameras in Baghdad, providing them with an opportunity to read obviously coerced statements which decry the Allied attacks on the people of Iraq.
What do you think, Lieutenant, about this aggression against Iraq?
I think our leaders and our people have wrongly attacked the peaceful people of Iraq.
This blatant violation of the Geneva Convention further infuriates President Bush and other world leaders. It also serves as a wake-up call to the public that there are real men and women behind the glossy remote-controlled weaponry they've watched on TV. Support for the troops of Desert Storm begins to swell throughout the United States, with yellow ribbons appearing on street corners from coast to coast. Once again, Saddam's efforts to manipulate the media have backfired. By January 27th, 10 days after the air offensive began, over 23,000 sorties have been flown by U.S., Saudi Arabian, British, French, Canadian, and other Allied aircraft. On the ground in both Kuwait and Iraq, much of the heavy armor and artillery of the Republican Guard is shattered by the coalition airstrikes. Critical bridges used for Iraqi supplies are destroyed. Chemical and nuclear production facilities are leveled. But despite this pounding, Saddam remains defiant. In Washington, President Bush tries to appease other world leaders by offering the Iraqi dictator one final chance to withdraw from Kuwait. The deadline is February 23, 1991. In his war office in Riyadh, Schwarzkopf knows his D-Day is closing in. He continues monitoring Iraqi troop dispositions, still puzzled at the immobility of Saddam's forces. Apart from a few moderate movements along the Saudi border, there are no major troop relocations. The West remains completely open. It is almost too good to be true. On February 14, 1991, Schwarzkopf gives the order. And throughout Saudi Arabia, his armored divisions begin to move. Hail Mary is starting to gear up. At 4 a.m. on February 24th, 10 days after Schwarzkopf initiated his plan, 155mm howitzers opened fire at frontline Iraqi artillery positions. Soon afterwards, Marine M60 tanks and Cobra helicopters rushed forward. Behind this blitz, thousands of Marines from the 1st and 2nd Divisions charge across the Saudi border into Kuwait. Employing beach attack methods, they slice through barbed wire, braving minefields and trenches filled with blazing crude oil. At the same time, Saudi and other Arab ground units head north for Kuwait City. But unknown to Saddam and his generals, this attack is only a diversion. With no spotter planes in the air and their communications in disarray, the Iraqis are oblivious to the powerful American, British, and French forces massed 300 miles to the west. These airborne and tank divisions are the crushing left hook of Schwarzkopf's Hail Mary plan. With Saddam's forces fully engaged by the opening diversionary thrust, Schwarzkopf's tanks now begin rolling east, with the aim of smashing through Saddam's exposed western flank. From his headquarters, Schwarzkopf monitors the progress of his ground assault, evaluating up-to-the-minute reports from his field commanders. General Boomer's Marines have pushed through Iraqi barriers with only minor resistance and few casualties. They're also encountering something else: droves of surrendering Iraqi soldiers. Within hours, an intelligence bulletin informs Schwarzkopf that the desalinization plant in Kuwait City has been blown up by the Iraqis. Since this facility is the only source of drinking water in the region, Schwarzkopf knows that Saddam's forces must be pulling out. If Schwarzkopf can cut off the Iraqi retreat, chances for a complete victory are excellent. If he waits, Saddam's forces might escape with their armaments intact, allowing them to be a continuing threat to the stability of the Persian Gulf. Schwarzkopf immediately gives the order to accelerate the ground campaign. To the east, the progress is remarkable. The 1st Marine Division secures Kuwait's international airport, freeing a path for members of the Pan-Arab Coalition to converge on Kuwait City. However, the situation in the desert to the west is dramatically different. Due to the slower advance of some of Schwarzkopf's armored units, his attack has been thrown off schedule. His forces must now rush to close the gap through which the Iraqis hope to escape. The place on which they converge is an obscure patch of desert known only for its name on a command grid: 73 Easting. When the 7th Army Corps reaches 73 Easting, it intercepts the crack Tawakalna Division of Iraq's Republican Guard, hard-bitten Iraqi veterans who spearheaded the assault into Kuwait. What follows is one of the heaviest engagements of the war. Charging to the attack, the American forces utilized their advantages in speed and maneuverability, quickly gaining the upper hand. With the guns of the superior American M1A1 tanks blazing, the Iraqi tanks are systematically incinerated. The Americans don't lose a single vehicle. The battered Iraqi units that try to run from the onslaught find potential escape routes through the Tigris and Euphrates Valley, sealed by the 101st Airborne Division. Coalition helicopters now mix their fire intermittently with messages instructing surrender. In all areas of the battle theater, shell-shocked Iraqi troops realize that there is no way out. Over 60,000 of them simply throw down their weapons and give up. In some cases, Iraqi soldiers even surrender to Western journalists. Wounded and demoralized, They confess that they feel safer in the custody of U.S. forces than with their own Republican Guard. Evidently, in a desperate attempt to regain control over his shattered army, Saddam has ordered hit squads to round up and execute any deserting soldiers. In Kuwait's capital, Iraqi resistance, and most importantly the occupation, is over. While General Schwarzkopf frowns upon disclosing casualties, even those on the enemy side, he does reveal that in the 3 days it has taken to liberate the city, an estimated 27 Iraqi divisions have been overrun or destroyed. During the entire conflict, some will estimate that up to 100,000 Iraqi soldiers lost their lives. Coalition losses, on the other hand, will be dramatically less. 244 service men and women killed in action. On February 27th, after 7 months of occupation, the U.S. Marines step aside, letting the Pan-Arab Corps have the honor of being the first to march into Kuwait City. They are greeted by jubilant citizens with cheers, hugs, and welcoming banners. When American forces later search the abandoned Iraqi war headquarters in Kuwait City, they find a sand table model of the battle zone. On it, Iraq's toy guns are all pointed south and east towards the Persian Gulf. Schwarzkopf's Hail Mary plan had worked to perfection.
When I talked to you all before, and you asked me what we were going to do if we had to go to war, and I told you we were going to kick ass, and that's exactly what we did.
I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over.
On February 28, 1991, 4 days after the ground war began, President Bush publicly announces the cessation of hostilities in Operation Desert Storm. The 100-hour war is over. In Riyadh, Kuwait City, Washington, and all over the globe there is cause for celebration. Fathers, sons, mothers, and daughters will be returning home safely to their loved ones. For General Schwarzkopf, Powell, and countless other U.S. officers who served in Vietnam, the moment is one of special significance. They feel a sweeping sense of vindication, one that they believe is long overdue. In their minds, the ghosts of Vietnam have finally been exorcised. The victory, which had eluded an entire generation of military personnel in the jungles of Southeast Asia, has at last been won in the desert sands of Kuwait. While there were complaints after the war in some circles that Saddam Hussein himself had eluded capture or even death at the hands of the coalition, Schwarzkopf pointed out that the unseating of Saddam was never an official aim of Operation Desert Storm. And even though Saddam did remain defiantly in power in Iraq, his war machine had been seriously crippled, effectively removing it as a threat to the region. Despite any controversy, however, the fact remains that a skilled and resolute command group, headed by General Norman Schwarzkopf, faced down a fanatically determined foe to win one of the most stunning victories of the modern era. Where Saddam controlled with terror, Schwarzkopf led with inspiration and brains. Schwarzkopf himself summed up the question of leadership when he said,
"And so I attribute a great deal of the failure of the Iraqi army to fight to their own leadership. They committed them to a cause that they did not believe in. They all are saying that they didn't want to be there. They didn't want to fight their fellow Arab. They were lied to. They were deceived, and when they went into Kuwait, they didn't believe in the cause. And then after they got there, they had a leadership that was so uncaring for them, that they didn't properly feed them, they didn't properly give them water, and in the end, they kept them there only at the point of a gun."
General Norman Schwarzkopf had no need of such methods. He fought a war on many fronts: military, logistic, political, and psychological, and he won them all. But ever the team player, Schwarzkopf refused to take all the credit for Desert Storm. As he said to his troops in his farewell address, "We all did it together. We all paid the price. We all shared in the victory."